The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
This week, in what will be part one of a two-part show that will conclude next Sunday in part two, and in keeping with Pennsylvania issues, we welcome back House Appropriations Chairman and member of the Republican Leadership Caucus, Representative Seth Grove. However, unlike last time, Chairman Grove is now in the minority party in the House. You have heard the last 2 weeks from the Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives, Joanna McClinton, as well as Democratic Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, Austin Davis, promoting and defending Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's budget, which is approximately $48 billion. So this effectively represents the Republican response. As some of you know, our state's fiscal year ends June 30th, which means our state can spend no money starting July 1st without a new budget. So we brought in the person who bears that responsibility for the House Republicans. However, in what's breaking news, and we have no choice but to cover it because of its historic nature, we are going to cover and break down with Seth the attempts by Democratic House members and legislators in the Pennsylvania House to remove a fellow Democratic representative, Representative Kevin Boyle, a 5-term Democratic legislator, in what is the most egregious trampling of the Bill of Rights in the history of Pennsylvania. This election interference fraud was furthered by the loathsome District Attorney of Philadelphia, a person we've covered on this show a lot, I think you'll remember, the villainous Larry Krasner, who has been on the docket for impeachment by the General Assembly prior to the most recent incident we'll discuss today. The matter has been referred to the Attorney General's office for investigation and possible prosecution of Krasner for election interference. Helping us break this down is our guest, whose path to public service actually began when Seth enlisted in the United States Navy and was selected for its nuclear engineering program and submarine school. Seth's father had actually served in the Navy during the Vietnam War. Regrettably, he was discharged for medical reasons due to a congenital heart defect, which was undetected since Seth was a child. After his naval service, he went on to receive a degree in public administration at York College. After college, Seth became a legislative assistant to U.S. Congressman Todd Platts, and then served in a similar capacity to Pennsylvania Senator Sam Saylor, ultimately becoming the chief of staff for Pennsylvania Representative Keith Gillespie. Seth was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2008 and has been reelected 7 times. He has served on 13 of the House's standing committees. Due to his legislative accomplishments, he has been asked to speak at national conferences on state fiscal policy. He resides in Dover with his wife and Dr. Casey Grove, as well as their 3 children. We have a lot to talk about, and it's going to take 2 parts to get it done.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Representative, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Thanks so much. Great to join you once again.
Having you here as an expert, Appropriations Chairman of the House of Representatives, and member of the Leadership Caucus of the House is great for us. And as much as I want to get right in and jump into the budget that I've just prefaced, we have to take a little bit of detour because you're also involved in the Rules Committee, which has really nothing to do with the budget, but it does in today's show matter because before I came here today, I always try to check breaking headlines, what happened today in Washington and Harrisburg, that might inform the show and my guest and get a comment on. And as fate would have it, there was a screaming headline in the Scranton Times that I read about a Democratic representative who, and his name being Kevin Boyle, a 5 or 6 term Democratic legislator, part of the Democratic caucus, and their one vote majority, by the way, who apparently the Democrats were not too happy with over some personal issues that he was dealing with, and actually tried to and did run against their own member. If I'm getting this correct, stop me. They ran a primary opponent to beat their own member, put in $200,000 to $300,000 Democratic raised dollars to beat their own Democratic colleague. But that wasn't the story, because that's just politics as usual, as you know, in Pennsylvania. The story in the headline I read was about the Philadelphia District Attorney, Larry Krasner. I have done at least 3 shows and probably 3 or 4 of my editorial opinion pieces, Seth, on Larry Krasner, even before he was impeached, even before any of that. Apparently, to help the Democratic Party beat their own Democratic colleague member, Larry Krasner issues a warrant for arrest for a PFA, Protection from Abuse order, that had been previously expunged and they shouldn't even have had a record of it. In time, though, to actually help change the outcome of that primary election and directly involve, before the primary, they dropped this arrest warrant. He actually called a news conference to do it, destroyed Kevin Boyle's candidacy, a fellow Democrat, by the way, and then said, oh, our bad, the arrest warrant should never have been issued. Now, of course, the Republicans have screamed high crimes and misdemeanors, as they should. In fact, if I'm correct, I think the matter is being turned over to the Attorney General of Pennsylvania to investigate crimes by Krasner, specifically election interference, comes to the top of the list. So take it from there, and look, take all the time you need. I've just taken 3 or 4 minutes to give the audience why we need you to talk about this. Go ahead.
So, and this all broke while we're in session the week before the election. So Wednesday morning, we get in, we see headlines, arrest warrant issued for Representative Chairman Kevin Boyle, he's chairman of the Insurance Committee, very powerful committee, deals with insurance issues, on Wednesday morning. So we're like, what's his status? Is he on the fleet? Like, because, you know, are the police looking for him? Is there a manhunt? Has he turned himself in? Is he okay? So we get on the floor and the House Democrats want to vote him. And our question is, are you in contact with Representative Boyle to know how he's voting this week? Because if you are, you should probably tell the authorities where he's at and help resolve this situation, because you can't harbor a felony or a felon or someone who's running from an arrest warrant. That is a crime. But the House Democrats voted him. And ironically, with a 102 majority, one person, there is no bill on that calendar that came close to 102. It was all broad bipartisan vote. It was no issue. Non-controversial bills were on the slate. So there was no reason to vote him that day at all.
But they did so anyway.
They did so anyway. And it's very easy to put somebody on leave. You just put them on leave. Because literally, did they communicate, hey, how are you going to vote on these bills today? It's a problem. So fast forward, we're dealing with that. The day after, and I guess the Democrats thought it was a bad look to vote a person who's wanted for a crime, has an arrest warrant. So the leader, Matt Bradford, goes to the press and said, I'm creating a new committee to investigate how, if members are incapacitated, and deal with it through this committee. And we really don't see anything else on that. And then the Monday before the election, like the next week, as you said, DA Larry Krasner gets up saying, oh, I don't want to influence the election. We made a horrible mistake. We shouldn't have executed this warrant. There was no PFA because it got expunged years prior. My bad. It was 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. People are going to vote within hours. People are doing mail-in votes, already voting. Like, to me, you know, it looks like an election hammer job by the Democratic Party. And by the way,
against their own member.
Against their own member. Their own leadership team helped his opponent get on the ballot. They put in $200,000 to $300,000 of campaign that we know of against him. And then you have this like fake arrest warrant that should have never occurred right before the election. So we're asking the Attorney General to investigate and look into this, because the police and the DA should never be used for electioneering. Like if it should have been triple checked by his department. And, our bad. We're not sure what went wrong, but we'll make sure. We'll get a blue ribbon committee together. We'll make sure this never happens again.
Thanks.
It's crazy. Fast forward to today, right? It's obviously we're airing on Sunday. We're taping this on Wednesday. Session is, I thought, over. I get back to my office. I take my tie off. I'm back at my office. And, my staff comes in. We got a rules committee. Now, I don't chair the rules committee. I'm just on it as a member of leadership team. We go down there, and it's this committee. It is a partisan committee made up of 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And it is to determine your mental capacity to serve in the General Assembly. It is secretive. They can subpoena your health records. They can subpoena your financial statements. I call it the Inquisition Committee, and it's designed to oust one member of their own membership, Brendan Boyle. Now, we have a process for expelling members. It requires a 2/3 vote. It's an open, transparent process. It's a normal committee work. They can execute that anytime they want. They're in the majority, but it does require a 2/3 vote to actually do that. Now, all this entire time, Kevin Boyle, Brendan's his brother. Kevin has been voting. They've been voting him constantly the entire time. They've been using this proxy voting system. And to be honest, the way they have it set up, you can join Elon Musk and head to Mars and vote.
Right.
Apparently, you could be sitting in jail wherever and just vote on the House floor. So it's a crazy process. So we got this Inquisition Committee passed upon party lines, and it just unconstitutional, a blatant violation of individuals' constitutionality. By the way, they didn't even have the cameras on at the beginning. I brought that up. I'm like, so you're creating a secretive Inquisition Committee when you don't even have the cameras on. Like, the rest of the citizens of Pennsylvania have no idea this is happening. Like, after I'm done speaking, 10 minutes later, they pop the cameras on and start streaming it. It's crazy. Like, this should never happen in America, where you create a Inquisition Committee. What's the cost? Are you hiring outside counsel? Who's your head inquisitor? Is it staff? Are you hiring a law firm? Like, how is this whole process going to shake up?
Seth, as I'm hearing this, obviously, from you, as our audience is, and I should say will on Sunday. And I can't tell you as an attorney, a person who has sworn as an officer of the courts of Pennsylvania to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. I can't believe in America we're having this conversation. But then again, I can't believe in America what I've been witnessing over the last year or so. I've talked about, the state and the National Democratic Party. I was a Democrat for 45 years. I think you remember I ran for governor of Pennsylvania as a Democrat myself. Was very proud of that party. I left it because I thought its values had changed, that a radical, progressive, leftist ideology overtook it. And I want to make clear that I have many, many, many good Democratic friends who are as upset as I am about what their party has done. But the hypocrisy of these Democrats at the national and even at the state level we're talking about in Harrisburg, to basically trample the Constitution, claim the Republicans are a dangerous threat to democracy, when in fact it's the Democrats at the federal level, as you're aware, Seth, that have weaponized the Justice Department to prosecute potential opponents. They have done every dirty trick in the book to keep a sacred Democrat. Look, Seth, if there's a Mount Rushmore of great Democrats in our country's history, I'm pretty sure John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his brother Bobby Kennedy are on it. Well, there's Bobby Kennedy's son, a Time magazine cover boy for being a great environmental and protector of the downtrodden himself, Bobby Kennedy Jr., you're aware, is running for president. They've censored him. They have developed a hit squad to get him kicked off ballots. He has just done an infomercial explaining himself and why he's running. They've had it torpedoed and knocked off Twitter, knocked off Meta, knocked off Facebook. He's now filed federal complaints about censorship. The Democratic Party, and now in our own state, you're telling me that they actually have formed an inquisition. As a lawyer, by the way, you're going to try to potentially out a person in violation of every part of the United States Constitution, the 14th Amendment, equal protection, right to due process, notice opportunity, all that's getting kicked. I cannot believe I'm actually having this discussion with you in America and in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I have to tell you that. I'm appalled. I'm appalled. I don't know what even to say about it. And Krasner, a tool of a DA, is their tool stooge lackey, does this at their behest to torpedo someone they want to get rid of, and then says, oh, my bad, we shouldn't have done it. Well, that's like trying to unsee something. It's not really possible. I can't tell you how appalled I am as an attorney that my former party that I cared about would engage in these kind of activities. Your comment.
Yeah, it is sickening to watch this. Weaponizing the Philadelphia Police Department, weaponizing the district attorney's office to do electioneering, to oust a fellow Democrat through that process. And then on top of that, creating an inquisition committee to kick a person out. And, I assume, I don't know for a fact, I assume he's probably in drug counseling right now. And as he's going through counseling, their compassionate Democrat motive of ousting him and leaving him high and dry and not working with him, I just don't get it. I don't know. I don't see a future in that for a democracy if we're just going to start these committees under the cover of darkness and toss people. And the scary part, weaponizing our police and our district attorneys to do the electioneering dirty work. If you don't like somebody, let the people finally have a say. Get it out there, be transparent, be open, and let the candidates battle out. And at the end of the day, let the voters just decide who they want electing them. That is democracy. That is how our Constitution, that's how our founding fathers wanted it. That's how it should be done. It is that simple. It shouldn't be manipulated and using these power play and just an unfair advantage and just ethically and morally just wrong. It's not how our founders want it. I think they're crying, and they would be.
I feel like crying.
Right now.
I feel like crying. I can't understand that the desperation to be in power at any cost, even at the trampling and effectively obliteration of the United States and Pennsylvania constitutions. At what point is being in power that important that you're willing to violate all the reasons you're in power to begin with and what people have entrusted you in our Constitution in this great privilege to serve in that body? My father served in the House of Representatives and always held it in the highest esteem. I can't say anything else other than, Seth, I'm appalled. And I'm finding it hard, even though I have a job to do and I need you to do yours, and I know you will as Appropriations Chairman. We need to talk about the budget, and I feel like that's almost anticlimactic with the conversation we already had. But we do have a budget to talk about, and it's important for Pennsylvania that we do. The elephant in the room is, according to an elite blue ribbon panel, after the Commonwealth Court determined that the funding for education in Pennsylvania was unfair and unconstitutional, and that ordered them to remedy it. This blue ribbon panel determined that the funding discrepancy is in the vicinity, $5.4 billion would it be, is what I heard. We all know that can't happen in this year's budget. There's not the money for that. So the way they described it was, well, I think I actually said, someone asked me, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time is the correct answer. So that was their answer. We can't get it done all in this budget, but we're going to take a big step. And that sounds like a very laudatory, commendable goal that they're going to try to fund the discrepancy and unfairness for our poor school districts. Now, Joe Pittman's point, the Senate Majority Leader, Republican, when he was on the show, his answer to that was, we're all for that too, but he had 2 points. One, school choice still matters to especially the poorest school districts who have talented, smart children, and they want to give them the right to get ahead in better schools. that there should be funding for school choice. He made the point. The second thing was that they're taking, I think it's $14 billion with a B again, out of surplus Pennsylvania has accumulated. They call it a rainy day fund, and they're going to tap into that money. And he said that would be a mistake because that money, when we really need it down the road, that's why you have it. To use it now to fill gaps and to get your wish list done and not raise taxes, we'll end up raising them down the road anyway. So take it from there.
Yeah, so let's fast forward to this. Let's talk about the constitutional kind of crisis we're in. So school districts in Democrat areas sued the state a number of years ago, and that in the Commonwealth Court, that single judge came out with a ruling that how we fund schools is unconstitutional. Now, the problem is everybody has their own interpretation of what that judge said because it's a very long order that she put out. So people across the board, so Democrats are saying she meant massive funding increases. I agreed in that she didn't like school property taxes as a way of paying for school districts. We're not even talking about that in anything. And then you also have the no child should be left behind which means to me school choice. So there are multiple interpretations of what the judge meant. Now, she did, at the end of the day, say it is up to the governor and the General Assembly because we, the courts, do not have the power of the purse strings. We do not set education policy. I did agree with that. And I think the court should do that far more than what they do now. So they punted it to us. Now, under Governor Wolf, we created a fair funding commission. And that commission actually worked out great. It was Republicans, it was Democrats, House, Senate, governor. And we came up with the new fair funding formula that we put in place under Governor Wolf, and been putting new money in that year over year. Wasn't good enough for these school districts, so they ended up suing. And it happened at a time with the 5-year look back with that commission. So we said, okay, let's use that commission. It worked out so well last time to see if we can come up with a compromise on how to deal with this moving forward. There was no deal, and it was a partisan vote. Democrats voting to approve this majority report, Republicans voting against it. And that was the Shapiro administration, his 3 appointees, House Democrats, Senate Democrat. And there was one Senate Democrat actually voted against it because it wasn't enough. So it is what it is. But that report had 3 buckets of money. The big bucket, the $5 billion you were talking about, that is to increase equity. So they came up with this number of $13,000. Every student should be paid to have minimum of $13,000 expenses for them. And that was brought up by this Penn State professor who was hired by the litigators as the benchmark. The 2 other buckets are school districts who have raised property taxes, who they think should have a high tax burden, and they feel they should lower them. So they give it a bucket of dollars for those school districts, but there's no requirement to actually lower the property tax. It's just you have a high threshold. We're going to give you more money, but you don't actually need to lower your taxes. And then there's a bucket of school districts who they felt had a low tax effort. They felt like these select number of school districts, haven't raised taxes enough, so we want you to raise your school property taxes by $291 million. So those are the 3 buckets that this report looked at. And that final report came about 2 weeks prior to the governor's budget address. So when he introduced his budget, he wanted to do $1 billion increase in education in line with that. Now, the secret sauce of this is that report was billions of dollars every year for the next 7 years. If you look at his 5-year outlook, the governor never put in any increases in education funding outside of his proposed year for next fiscal year. So his budget, which in total spends $3 billion more than what we have in revenues, will use the budget surplus. So we have a surplus of about $6 billion, and then we have a rainy day fund of about $6 billion. Rainy day fund is set aside money for economic downturn, which conceptually we're due for. Every 10 years we have about a recession. We're over that. You can kind of see the economic data. GDP just clicked down 1.6%. Our revenues are matching that. Our tax revenue growth is only 0.4% for this fiscal year. Overall our general fund revenue, which includes some other revenue sources like treasury, investment income, so forth, is only at 1.4%. So our growth is basically stagnant and isn't increasing. He's asking for an 8% increase above last year, $3 billion more in revenue than we have. So his goal is to use this surplus dollars to backfill recurring costs. And that surplus is one time. We have, once it's gone, it's gone. There's no replenishing it. So over the next 5 years, based on his budget, and if he was honest in his budget, he would have said, we will increase funding for education $1 billion. We blow through both the surplus and the rainy day fund, $12 billion, and actually even more because you'll have interest payments over the next few years. And we know interest payments are very high because of the Fed's interest rates are very high.
It's 8%.
Yeah, you're looking at $14 billion over revenue, which will result in less than 5 years at a 46% increase in the income tax to pay for. It doesn't matter if you're going to help the homeless, our most vulnerable, education funding. One of my favorites, Office Inspector General, to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. All of that needs money to operate. And if you don't have recurring costs or recurring revenue for recurring costs, you have a deficit. And that's what we have right now in Pennsylvania. We are spending more than what we're bringing in. This year's budget is $2 billion over revenue. So you have to fill a $2 billion hole before you break even. And then he's asking for additional $3 billion on top of that. It doesn't add up. It's very much DC budgeting, right? But we can't print money. So at the end of the day, the taxpayers are on the hook with a liability of billions of dollars. And that's the scary part that no one on the other side of the aisle wants to address. They want to talk about the spending, how wonderful it is, but you got to pay for it. Recurring costs need to be funded by recurring revenue and not one-time sources. Now, there are some stuff in the governor's budget. He does say he wants to spend or one-time payment. So his big one, and it was a funny line on him in his budget. Me and the majority chairman of the Appropriations Committee on the House side, Jordan Harris, great guy, love him, we get along. We had a good chuckle over it. He goes, the power of the pads, these sites he wants to create. It was very funny. We had a good laugh. But he wants $500 million, but he wants to bond it. So at the end of the day, that $500 million cost is going to cost $900 million because of the bond payment. And the question to the budget secretary was, why don't you cash flow it? Like literally, that's something we actually have cash for. We have a one-time expense for one-time cost. And they're like, because they need it long-term to balance their budget because governor's got a re-election in 2026. We all know he's running for president in 2028, regardless of what happens this year. Right. So we know he wants to get through those budgets without a massive tax increase to fund all of this fund.
It sounds to me like he's checking a lot of boxes in terms of constituencies that, of course, assure his reelection as governor, but would be, the boilerplate for taking it national and running for president. So, in other words, you kind of throw the grenade, close the door, and leave the room. It blows up in the room. You're off to greener pastures and higher offices, maybe, and you've left potentially a disaster.
I would be running on fixing the structural deficit here in the Commonwealth because they got a worse one down in D.C. Right. I'm faced with divided government, which you're probably going to face in D.C. at some point. So if I can fix a structural deficit, bring the Commonwealth into balance with a split General Assembly, I think I got a better shot of making a great argument of why I should be president of the United States. Because if I can do it in a partisan, the House is close, 102, 101, right? In a close partisan divided General Assembly, I've fixed our structural deficit. I've invested in education, yada, yada, yada. I can do it down in D.C.
Well, with that, I will end part one right now. We'll take a quick coffee break, you and I, and we'll come back with part two in a moment. So thanks, Seth.